early, and it wasn't scheduled to be early, but then it became early as we had some overlap. And Rusty and I, talked back and forth as that session was going on. We're just going to incorporate that into next year's faculty scholars community. Maybe some of the people that are part of the community will participate in the research showcase, but then just to hear the research that goes on, I think is affirming and important. So we want to be mindful of time that we do have remaining. So we're going to kind of just dive in. Welcome those of you that are on Zoom as well. We got a couple on there at least, but we want to make this time meaningful for you and valuable for you. So we're going to do two different things today. The first thing we're going to do is Dr. Kelly Ellis is going to talk to us about really it's that responding to the feedback you get in promotion, tenure, and evaluation materials. So when you submit your materials, you get that feedback from the committee, you get that feedback from the department chair. What are you supposed to do with that feedback? So when we say, what are you supposed to do with it? We mean it in two ways, really. What are you supposed to do in your professional practice? Because they're telling you something might need to change. And then what are you supposed to do with it in writing? Because like I teach my students all the time, we want to make it as easy for that group next year to see what it is you want them to see, to know what it is you want them to know. So that's what Kelly's going to share with us, her perspectives on that. And then when she is finished, we're going to turn things over to Cindy Tran and Sara Brito, because if we go all the way back to our very first meeting in October, they raised ideas that people said, I want to know more about this. So we're going to have Cindy a chance to talk about calendars. We're going to have Sara with a chance to talk about spreadsheets. But really, they're both talking about the same thing. How do you manage the work? How do you manage the projects and the time? So that's going to answer questions that people have asked us since then. So that'll be our session for today. And we will make sure to end a few minutes before 2. And if either of you need to go before that, then by all means, take off when you need to. Okay. So Dr. Ellis, hand things over to you. Thank you so much.
For the opportunity. I recognize several familiar faces. I'm Kelly Ellis. I'm the chair of the Department of Clinical Therapeutic Programs, which is in our College of Education and Applied Human Sciences. I'm also a professor of speech language pathology. So I am speaking kind of from the perspective of a person who has gone up from promotion and tenure, who has secured being a full professor. So speaking at this kind of through the lens of my personal experience, but then also as a chair of a department. So I'm here to give you some, I guess, words of wisdom about how to respond to that specific feedback that you are receiving at your annual evaluation, how to position yourself clearly, right, in a place where the committee that's reviewing your annual evaluation says, oh my gosh, yes, this person is great. And then, of course, that committee recommendation goes on up to the department chair, who we want to say, right, is also going to agree wholeheartedly that you have responded to the feedback received in the prior annual evaluation. I also will be speaking from the perspective of a faculty member who has served on department and college promotion and tenure committees, as well as department annual evaluations. So that's kind of the experience that I bring. I'm going to primarily focus on how to address feedback received in your application or your annual evaluation. So I'm going to address some strategies on that writing piece. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of me. So one of the things that I would suggest when you complete your annual evaluation, and I think this is applicable for an application for promotion or tenure as well, is that you want to acknowledge the feedback directly that you received in the year prior. So I would say to be very specific about it, in what year, right, you received the feedback and in what area. So you want to just kind of approach it with intentionality and being very direct. So you don't want to kind of, talk around it. You want to say, last year it was suggested that I do X, Y, and Z. And, I'm going to address that in my narrative. I also think a strategy that I see some of my faculty use that has been successful for them is to make that kind of the words that you're using to address the feedback from last year stand out in the narrative. So some faculty of mine will use italics font. They'll bold that in response to the feedback received last year. I've also seen other faculty create a whole section of their self-evaluation in that annual evaluation that is, kind of tagged response to prior year's feedback. How you do it, I think, is ultimately up to you. Some would argue perhaps the italics font or the bold allows you to integrate that throughout the self-evaluation, while the separate section kind of puts it in a different place. But I do think there is wisdom into intentionally trying to make that stand out. I think another strategy is to be very specific about the actions that you have taken to address the feedback received from last year. I think it's best if you highlight tangible steps, specifically what you have done, avoiding things like, well, I have considered teaching effectiveness, or I have thought about or explored how to engage students in active learning. Rather than kind of speaking around it, I would say to address the concern related teaching evaluations, I have, and then again, provide very specific, tangible steps that you have completed. I have seen some faculty use tables for this purpose. And again, you've got to kind of play by the rules, understanding there are often page limits that you have to comply with annual evaluations. But if you have the ability to reference a table and then saying area of concern, steps taken, next steps, so that way you're kind of forward looking, future focused on not only what have you done, but what do you intend to continue doing. I also think it's important to note, even if the outcome wasn't ideal, I like to hear as a department chair, and if I was still serving as a committee for peer review purposes, even if you submitted a grant that was absolutely rejected or a publication that was not accepted, and it was a clear, no, that's happened to all of us. I would much rather hear that you tried than just not address it at all. So I think even if the outcome isn't ideal, I always like to see that my faculty are documenting that. I view it as continuous improvement and a commitment to continue, modifying our skill and our craft. So definitely demonstrate specific actions that you've completed, highlighting tangible steps, even if the outcome was less than ideal. I think it's also nice to present evidence of what you've done. You've described it in the narrative, but providing evidence as well. So that may come in the form of referencing artifacts. You're talking about it in the annual application or the narrative, but you're referencing particular artifacts that you've uploaded as supporting evidence in that annual application. Some of my faculty will do additional metrics to show their commitment to addressing that area of improvement. One of the areas I think my faculty are challenged with most is when it comes to student opinions of instruction, very low response rate. So those student opinions of instruction aren't always clearly kind of representative of their skill in the classroom. So they may choose to use additional forms of gaining student opinion of instruction, and then they analyze those more informal tools and include that as an artifact for the committee to review. So of course, they're not ignoring that Explorance Blue or that formal measure of student opinion of instruction provided by the university, but they're doing additional analysis of their teaching. I think that really lands kind of well with the committee because they're saying, hey, we acknowledge Particularly, we primarily have graduate programs in my department. You may only have 8 kids or 8 students in your class, and then if only 2 respond, it can really, be a challenge in terms of displaying your skill through those student measures. Additional things that you may reference would be, of course, artifacts like submitted manuscripts, acceptance letters, not only just putting them in the annual evaluation, but referencing it in the narrative so that the review committee can see, how that fits into your story as a faculty member. I think my next suggestion would be to state, again, forward-looking goals, being specific, but realistic. So you don't want to say you're going to do a bazillion things that your time really doesn't allow for. So I would be very specific about what I'm going to do next to address this area, but being very realistic with what I have the resources and the time to complete. Ultimately, you want to show momentum. I know you want me to establish a research trajectory. Here's what I've done, and here's what I'm going to continue doing. Again, my department seems to use a table for that purpose. It works well, may or may not work with your department. Another strategy, and my final strategy that I think works well in terms of addressing feedback that you received from the prior year's evaluation, is to reference any institutional or external support that you've used to address it, right? So I've attended this, FCT&L workshop. I've attended this academic impressions, professional development. I've joined this mentoring group with my discipline. Whatever it is, I think referencing those, again, both institutional and external supports show that you're really working to address any areas of concern. So those are my, I think, 6 suggestions on how to address feedback received from your annual evaluation in terms of the writing. I don't think I've specifically address the doing part, but I'm understanding that perhaps the next speakers are addressing how to be strategic about spreadsheets and calendars, which I think would definitely help in developing an action plan for you to, kind of target these areas identified by either your department chair or a department committee. Happy to answer any questions that you may have of me.
What the table might look like.
Yeah.
Will you
so-
repeat the question, please, since there's not a.
Yeah. So the question was to provide a description of what a table may look like. Very simple is what I've seen. So here's the area that was identified in last year's annual evaluation. Here is what I have done, and here is what I am either doing now or intend to do moving forward. So almost like 3 parts of a table. You're very welcome.
I've actually used that table to respond to reviewers for paper submissions as well, to say this was all of the comments and feedback, and here is how I have addressed them, or my response to say that I didn't address them in the paper, but here's why.
Here's why, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody on Zoom with a question, you can come off mute. I don't think there's anything in the chat.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would encourage you to think about the annual evaluation as well as your application for promotion and tenure as an opportunity to tell your story, right? It's an opportunity to highlight your work and to inform others of just all of the wonderful things that you're doing. I think if you approach it with that mindset, it becomes less burdensome, at least for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. I think that's wonderful information that we appreciate the words of wisdom, but also the experience that informs that. A couple of things as Kelly was talking that I want to say kind of as we wrap up and transition to the other part of today. there are a lot of reasons why we don't handle that kind of feedback well. I don't mean in terms of receiving it well, but in terms of doing something with it. One is a lot of time passes between the time you receive that feedback and the time you're supposed to do something with it later. And you may say, what was that feedback? What was I supposed to do with that? And I think just on that intentionality that Kelly's talking about is going to put people in good position. So I'm excited about that part. And then the other thing is it always feels like stepping on toes. Like those aren't things we necessarily want to talk about. But I think there's a boldness that comes with just saying, this is what you told me, this is what I've done with it. And so I think that's to be appreciated. So thank you again, Kelly. So Sarah and Cindy, we're going to transition to you all. We can go in either order. It looks like Cindy's deferring to Sarah because Sarah has to get across campus.
We don't finished anyway, but I don't want to get.
I think we probably will.
Good transition from annual evaluation planning to spreadsheet to.
So if you're gonna hang out in this area, I'm gonna leave this up here so that your voice is picked up on there. Okay.
Excellent.
And then I'll let you kind of
Do you want
introduce your context for it.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I will.
Yeah.
Can we maybe just do a check on sound, or you feel confident that they can hear me? Okay, sure, thank you. So it was a little while ago now that this was brought up, and I'm not very familiar, so I've taught previously overseas, so I've just had 2 years in the US, so the whole P&T process is new to me. It's not something I've done before. And here we have expectations to the university, the college, but also at the department level. So in our area, the department level is the most extensive. And I found a few things confusing in my space. And again, I don't know if they're similar in other spaces, but like, for example, as you can see in my shared document that I created to help keep track of all this, my first year ran from August to December. And then my second year ran from like January to September. And the third, so even just like understanding components of what I'd done and where it fit into which year of tenure we were talking about. Because it's not just like, oh, your first year is, fall and spring, and the next year is from there to, so patterns. So I put that across the top. Down the left-hand side, this is, as I said, this is my way of organizing and keeping track of how am I tracking towards my KPIs, my key performance indicators in the 3 areas of teaching, research, and scholarship. So down the left, I've talked about the category in those 3 ways, whether they're teaching. I'll just start introducing it that way. I've done color coding. I've come in as an associate professor, so the light orange for me represents things that I must complete to maintain my associate professor or my expected level of performance. I then go into, and I will go slower in a minute, but just to give you an overview of how it's laid out, I then do a darker orange to represent if I'd like promotion, what I would be expected to complete in that final year. I need to also have met those if I'd like to be eligible for promotion. And then because it's all about rainbows, I've gone for a new color for scholarship, the second category. And I will go through this again, but effectively this was a very small one. In terms of scholarship, there's all faculty, which is the first one. And then the things I'd need to complete in addition if I wish to have my promotion. So there, I didn't even do different colors for that one, because really they're almost all for my promotion component. And then finally, in the area of service, I have done, again, what's expected as associate professor, but then also what would be expected if I'd like to be eligible or considered for promotion. So tenure is the light colors kind of, or the beginning of the list, and promotion is at the bottom of each section. And then across the top, I talked a little bit, I've done first, let me get to where I can scroll. I've done first, second, third, fourth year. And if I have time or if I do something, I think, oh, I better remember to include that. I go in and I put it into the table. So you can see I'm in the middle of my third. So fourth, fifth, and sixth year will be in the future. I also saw that October 2028 and felt like that's a really long time away. Don't look forward. That was very disheartening. I don't know why I even did that. It's because I knew I was presenting it maybe, and I thought, oh, 28, gosh, that feels forever. And okay, so now, again, I know everyone will have different criteria. So in terms of the template, I did share it out within the OT department because anyone else that's at associate level or seeking to do associate level, these criteria, my column C, will be the same for other people in my department. So you can see, for example, it's to do with student evaluations, maintaining faculty development plans. So in our program, as part of an OT, not only do we need to do it for the department, but our accrediting body also has a form that we must complete. So we have like a double duty called the Form F. So I put it in. I code my box green, my little my cell green, which means like, oh, I tick, I put something in there, good work, I'm tracking on that one. And in that first 6 months, there were some things that I just didn't have an opportunity to, so they're the same color. Or there's one further down, it's an elected and appointed roles down here, and I just came in and I wasn't appointed. So this is a way, so for example, most people probably need to do a peer teaching review. So I get to write that in when I know that I've had someone's come and they've written me one and I put it in. This actually kind of corresponds across to, I don't know if I still have it open, kind of corresponds across to the way we have to submit our evidence, which was just discussed. And when I don't have time to think, I just have a for inclusion and I just throw stuff in there. So like my peer review would be sitting in there because I haven't had time to stop and work out which of the folders within the folders within the folders it's going to go in, but I know eventually I'll want it. So at least when I come, a lot of the things I need as evidence are hopefully already sitting there. I'm not saying everything's there, but I try to have this twofold running system of listing and thinking and looking, because at any moment I could come in here, like for example, I happened to come and this Cassie again came and did a peer evaluation for me just in the last month, because I happened to pop in here and thought, oh my gosh, like I'm almost to almost the end of my period of this tenure and I really need to have one. So I've invited someone to come do a review for me. So it helps you keep track of like all the moving pieces. What else is there? So this one, for example, is one where the way it was set up is it was like, oh, you need so many presentations and so many publications. And then once you've done those, you need more of those. So I sort of like grayed out in black where I was acquiring the first levels of publications and presentations. And now anything I publish, I know I can put into this final column because I've achieved sort of the expected, and now I need to do the above and beyond. I can see like there's a funding. So I've started thinking about grant writing. I have one in a draft. So maybe that's something if I can write in there. I don't know. Is that helpful? Like for me, it's just like an at a glance and I can see colors. So if I'm in my teaching section and I have something that's not green, means I haven't put anything in for that yet. Oh, it made me realize too, like for example, this row, I only noticed that when I knew that I was going to have to come present to you, and I was looking at it, I was like, oh, how is it up to date? And I thought, what's going on with that grad school faculty? I wonder if I need to be doing something with that. So I hopped online, and with the web changing over, mine was completely blank. I was still listed, but all my information had disappeared. So when I contacted them, they're like, oh, we don't know what happened. That must have just disappeared. So like I was able to in advance say, oh, I've noticed that something's fallen away. Can you make sure it's up to date? Because I'm aware that I should be doing my next segment of that in fall. So they were able to get that all updated. And so when I submit my application in fall, they won't go, oh, where are your old records? And, I was able to go into emails and give them what they needed so I can be reinstated, I guess. I don't know what happened to me. I was listed. I didn't have like the dates anyway. So, it's nice to be kind of keeping track because little things like that. Questions about that? Maybe it looks super, sorry. And I actually have a few other little fun things. So in terms of my scholarship, I track using like what I call a Gantt chart, or that's what we call it when we do our PhDs. So I Gantt chart out my research. You can see these are ones that have completed. So I sort of came in with them. For example, I had like that publication straight away because all that was done. But looking forward, and I've done a couple of presentations. So again, I'm a color coder, I guess. I don't know. But as I work on things, I progress through, and rather than having them by month, which I previously do, I do them by tenure semester now. And I am really into the area of rural health workforce. So I've kind of charted out, I've given myself time to make connections here in the US, which I've done. I now have some connections at CPE, which we talked about earlier. Plus there's a new Appalachia consortium. And I've kind of been able to squeeze my way in there. So I've kind of done a little bit of that, and I'm looking and thinking, okay, now it's time to seek and apply funding, which I was saying I've started writing a grant so I can come in and sort of see like, where am I at with this? if I get some funding, I need to be also thinking about ethics and my data analysis. But yeah, student mentored, I do the same for my student mentored projects, just to keep track of like how that's going. And then research ideas that I haven't had a chance to do yet. Things that come to mind. Yeah, I think that's me. I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know. But mine is like a 20-page document and they're dot points plus instructions. And my brain, I just can't look at that and know if I'm achieving what I'm supposed to be achieving. I can't look at that list and think, do I have evidence to support all that? And where do I write it or how do I attach it? So for me, having the cells just makes it really clear. And either they're not green and I think, oh gosh, I haven't done that for this cycle, this year of tenure. I better get on to that. Or I can think, oh no, I've done a few things. I'll list them so that when it comes time to write it, I'll have some things to prompt me and think, oh yeah, those are things I need to talk about. Thoughts, questions? Anyone on Zoom? Hopefully Zoom can see that okay.
What do you do when, like, when there's an item, like, written on this Excel sheet, right?
Yes.
What else do you do regarding the item? Like, you see documenting and retrieving records?
Yes, well,
Sarah, will you repeat it for the people on
oh,
Zoom?
so the question is, when I'm utilizing the Excel spreadsheet to keep track of what I'm doing, how do I also keep track of the evidence or maybe other things that I might want to say about it when I'm actually writing my narrative? Yes. In terms of the writing the narrative, I probably don't have a lot of preparation. That happens much closer to the due date. I probably sit down and think more about the narrative component when I write the document. So it would be a good idea to maybe have somewhere that I have notes, but predominantly I'm making the list here. And then this is my like finder box, or what's it called in PCs? Finder, it's called file, Excel, I don't know. It's a thing where all your documents sit. And so for me, P&T is part of professional development. So I put it in a PD and then I have a P&T. Then each year I have a folder for as well. OCD. And then here, so again, this is a department thing. I don't know how you guys do it, but for us, we have specific folders that we have to put all of our information in. So I have the folders sitting here. If I'm feeling really energetic, I might start putting things in there, but generally I'm too busy to get things where they need to go. So I have this folder here called for inclusion. So if I was writing in my Excel document, student evaluations, I'll have a folder. It's actually not in here, but I have a folder in a slightly different place. And I put my student evaluations straight in there. So when it comes time for P&T, I just go straight to the folder where I know they are and in they go. This one, for example, in inclusion, I was saying, Dr. Ginn came and observed me for instruction. So I know when it comes time to write that in, well, yeah, I'll go straight here. So I don't have them, for me, I would just take lots of time to try and find things if they're not where I need to be. So those two work together. I've got evidence sitting in places that I feel like I can find them. I don't know, it depends how you organize your mind. So organize your documents wherever you know you'll find them. But at least I have a list. And so when I go to sit down and actually write that document, I've got, for example, 4 things right there that I know relate to items listed. Does that answer the question?
We have a question in the chat. Greg
Okay.
asks if you would be willing to share this
Yes.
file.
Yeah.
Or maybe a template or a shareable version of it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the only thing I would point out is obviously people need to, so I would assume everyone has this like in my column B, like they'll have all faculty. So you need to go through and put in whatever is needed for your department. And then, well, this one doesn't have it. So the options will be all faculty, the level that you are at, and then the level to which you hope to go to. For me, I really would like to do my promotion when I do my tenure, if I can get everything done. But even if I don't, I still have it tracking and I will just add years, hopefully after I get tenure, and keep tracking toward my promotion. So it should be customizable, but that's kind of my thought. So if you're sitting at an assistant professor, you would list everything that was for all faculty and assistant. And if you have a desire to go to associate, that would be like at the bottom in that slightly different color.
I'll let Greg know that we'll work with you to share a shareable version out. And if
It'll
it'll
be
be
easy.
okay, we could add
Yeah.
it to the resources.
Yeah, and then obviously everything in column C will come directly from your department's probably equally long 20 to 30 page document where everything's written in like these really unmanageable lists that you're like, what? Or at least I was, my brain was like. So,
I think it's a challenge.
Thank you so much.
okay, no
Yeah, appreciate
problem.
that.
All right, so I get to be the end of all the things this year for the program.
Yes, that is right. You'll be the last voice they hear.
Oh, man, pressure's on. Well, hopefully I give you some forward thinking. So we're already thinking about PNT and long-term thinking organization. And I guess I'm talking a little bit about calendar particulars. How do you organize your time so that you can get all of the things done for PNTs that you can also not burn out? Because my experience with the organization and calendar tricks that I'm gonna talk about today came out of I was back at the end of year 3 and I realized I was working 60-hour weeks and I was still drowning and I was at the end of year 3. And I was like, this is unsustainable and I will not continue. I will not make it to the point of tenure if I don't fix something. Why does everyone else have work-life balance and I don't? And I'm a numbers person. I'm in chemistry and forensic science. So I was like, let's go back and see what the numbers is because the math ain't mathing for me in my life. So I'm also kind of a bit of a policy nerd. If you have not found the policies for EKU, there's a policy on a lot of things and I dig them out. So I dug out the faculty workload policy. There is one of those that states that for general tenure line faculty, our workload is 80% teaching, 10% research, 10% service. Okay, so I started thinking, okay, 80% of my job is on teaching, and let's start there because I seem to drown in teaching related things. So let's see if I'm scaling that properly. And I said, in an ideal world, I'd like to only work 40 hours a week. I think that's reasonable for a full-time job. So I'm going to start my math with there and legally I'm supposed to get a half an hour lunch that I never take, but legally let's start with that math. Okay. So I'm going to work 7.5 hours per week. Am I big enough for Zoom to see? Probably. I don't think Zoom can see that. Oh, well, if you're playing along at home, grab a piece of paper. We're going to put some numbers on for it. Because I didn't want to have to deal with technology hookups, so I probably could have. Okay, and so additionally in that workload, it says of your 80% teaching, a standard workload is 12 adjusted contact hours. We can get into the whole what an adjusted contact hour is, and if you're teaching labs or capstones or anything that is not a standard 3 credit hour lecture, the math gets really wonky, and that's part of my own personal workload issue. But for the sake of starting point, let's say you're doing a 3-hour, 3 credit lecture course. That's the simplest we can make it, okay? So I should have 12 adjusted credit hours. So I should have 4 of these 3-hour lecture courses, or sorry, 4 of those lecture courses in my week, okay? Which means that if I'm spending 80% of my time teaching and I'm doing 4 courses, effectively I have 1 day worth of time per course. Obviously, I'm not going to spend an entire day on one course. Really the rest of the week. But that means for me, if I'm working 7.5-hour days, I have 7.5 hours to devote to 1 course. Okay, so we're going to use that as my starting point. So
And that can probably be unplugged since we're not using it. Yeah. Just reserve yourself. there.
yeah, I'd rather not play today. Okay, so 7.5 hours is 450 minutes. I have 450 minutes a week to work on my course. Now, I'm assuming a synchronous lecture. Obviously, if you're asynchronous, the numbers are different, however it works. But a synchronous lecture time, and I'm thinking ahead to fall. Now, we've changed the schedule for fall. Classes are slightly longer than they are this time. We've had 1 less week of the semester. And I'm not going to go into the semester-wide, convert it to the whole year, use your time off. I did that math the summer of 2020. It was not in my favor. I was working 60-hour weeks and realized I worked more than I would have if I'd had a 40-hour full-time job. When I added up the year-round work, it was not pleasant. Hence, now we're calendaring. Okay, so Your synchronous lecture time, you're gonna have 3 55-minute lectures if you're like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or 2 80-minute, or 1 hour, or 1 of it. So I'm just gonna round to the highest number, 165 minutes is lecture. At the bare minimum, to teach my classes, I'm gonna spend 165 minutes per week on standing in front of students lecturing. But we all know that lecture starts 5 minutes early and ends at least 5 minutes late because you show up early to get your technology set up, you stay late to answer student questions. And so 2 or 3 lectures a week of that, and I'm gonna go with just pre-post class engagement of about 30 minutes a week. It could be conservative depending on my students and how talkative we get and how much technology there is to set up and how many times the projector hates me. But we'll just use that as a nice round number. Okay, and we also know that showing up to teach 165 minutes of lecture does not mean that I pull it out of my head all the time. I've had to do some kind of preparation. If you're a new prep, double that number, and that's probably how much time you need to spend. So if it's 165 minutes of lecture, you're probably doing 300 minutes of actual preparation on the low end, and we've now just eaten time, and this is the problem for first couple of your faculty. If you're new prep after new prep after new prep, I've taught 12 different individual courses, multiple modes of some of them, meaning I have multiple versions of courses that I've developed. I didn't have a year without a new prep till year 5. Okay, so that's been my time sink, is in the prep time. I'm now at a point where I'm teaching classes I've done, where I can pull up the lecture, make a few updates, and spend maybe 100 minutes a week. We're going to give or take, actually thinking about how I can teach what I'm teaching better and how I can update what I'm already teaching. Okay, so I'm going to use that number. I hope that is the case for most of you after your first couple of years, that you aren't in this prep state of time. Okay, so I'm going to say class prep of 100 minutes. Okay. And then we also hold active office hours where students come in. Now I have office hours a lot of time during the week. I don't always have students in my office, but I'm also answering emails outside of that time for them. So I kind of think, okay, how much time do I actually spend with students on quote unquote office hours type things? I'm going to say for one class, maybe 45 minutes a week. Maybe some classes you have very questiony students, and maybe you have some that are less. So, office hours may be more or less for different classes for you. I just kind of picked a kind of round number. Okay, add all that up, subtract it from 450 minutes. I have 110 minutes left. And again, if it's a new to me lecture, my class prep has eaten a lot of that time, if not all of that time. And I'm out of time for that class. But assuming you're not out of time yet, there's still something we haven't added in that we do for every class. We grade things, okay? And this is another spot that can be a real time sink if what you are grading does not auto grade in Blackboard or Canvas. There's a lot of great ways to do auto grading things in Blackboard and Canvas, but there are some classes that you just can't. I have to have students write things, and if they write it, I must read it, I must score it. Okay, if they are doing data analysis, they have to actually do the analysis, and I have to check that the analysis is right. I can't automate that. Okay, there are some things we just have to grade. If I get an exam, I have to grade it. Okay, 110 minutes a week now is what I have for grading, and now I start thinking, what assignments have I assigned? And can I grade that for all of my students in 110 minutes? And it comes down to class size. A lot of it, okay? If I have 20 students, I have 5.5 minutes per student per week to do grading, which is not unreasonable for a kind of general homework set or quick check homework, something that doesn't take me too incredibly long. I've taught a 400 level class with 70 students. I had 1.5 minutes per student per week to grade. And if I gave an exam that took me 15 minutes per student per grade, I could give less than 2 of those a semester, and that'd be the only grade they would get. And I have blown my time out of the water. And that's what I was doing across 4 classes at a time every semester. And I was drowning. So what do we do about that? Okay. Well, obviously repeating classes helps. You can cut some of your class prep time down to give you a little more time for grading. We can be really strategic in what we're grading and how we're grading. I find if I am prepping a really good rubric, I can spend an extra 10 minutes on a really good rubric and it will cut my grading time in half per student because I have a really clear rubric, okay? We could do, I think I might have done a whole thing on grading and strategic aligning of the classes and how to plan a class. So check videos for that. I'm pretty sure I've done TL on it, but not, maybe I will next year. Never know. So what are some other things we can do? Well, if I'm saying I have 110 minutes per class, but I've got 4 classes, that means on the core of a week, I have 440 minutes or almost a full day worth of my time to devote to grading across my classes. So maybe instead of thinking about, I have to spread all of my assignments, so I'm only grading this much time for every class, it's over the course of the week, who am I grading for? And so maybe this week I have an assignment that I spend more time for class 1, but now next week I'm not having anything due for them, or what's due is super quick to grade or auto graded, or they can peer review it instead of me actually grading it. I can provide them the rubric and let them self-score it, something along that line. So that way there are some weeks that I'm maybe grading more for one class, but not for the other class. Here comes the calendar aspect. I can't have heavy grading for multiple classes on the same week and still make the math. If I'm planning to say, oh, well, it's going to take me 300 minutes to grade that assignment for this class, I can't have another class having an assignment that's going to take that much time too, even if that means next week I have nothing to grade. Because that means I'm going to have a hellish week and a great week that's going to end up full of other things and still be a busy week, because that's how academic life works. So if you're looking for balance, don't just think about, you have to think about a class, and then you have to think about the class on average over the semester. And then you have to think about all of the classes you're teaching and how they interlock, okay? And that interlocking idea to balance your workload, I think about it well before I write my syllabus or as I'm writing my syllabus. And what does that look like for me? I have this sheet of paper. I've actually had my TAs notice, they're like, you live and die by this packet. And if you can't see on Zoom, it is 17 pages long of a stapled together packet. 1 page for every week of the semester and 1 for spring break. Actually, there's probably 1 for pre and post semester as well. So probably 1. At the start of the year, before classes start, before my syllabi are finalized, I made this packet, and the packet has 3 columns on every page. The first column is teaching, the middle column is research, and the last column is service. And in each of those columns, I have little headers. One in teaching, I have 1 for every class that I'm teaching. In research, I have 1 for every project that I intend to make really good efforts on that semester. So it might be a student project, it might be a grant publication, like a grant I'm looking for, or a publication I'm looking for. Things that I know that on a weekly basis I will need to do something on. And then for service, things that I know are kind of commonly pop up, some major committees that I'm on that consistently have work to do and things like that. Am I doing okay on time today?
Yeah, we have a little less than 10 minutes.
Okay, so I'll wrap up pretty quick. But so before the semester starts, I take my trusty sheets and I go through and I have 1 for every week and I write down, what am I assigning in every class? When do my major service committees, like I know that advising starts at this point in the semester and it's going to pick up for a couple weeks, then it's going to die down. So where are those heavy advising weeks going to be? Where are the weeks that I know I need to have midterm grades in, that I'm going to do a last minute push on any grading to do? And just kind of where are students handing things in? Where do I need to hand them back? And I map it all out week by week before my syllabi are 100% set. So if I'm flipping through going, oh, I have students turning in a lab report, that's going to be a lot of grading time, and I'm giving them an exam that week, that's not a great idea. What it also does is opens you up to not only kind of preserves your sanity through the semester, saying, this is when I know I'm going to be busy. It helps me prep family when I can say, I know that these 3 weeks are going to be really tough because there's a lot going on, and I can see that before it even starts the semester. but it also opens you up to your strategic yeses and strategic nos. Meaning when Gil and Rusty email you and you sit and say, 3 weeks from now, I need to know if you can give a talk. And I know, okay, I'm gonna have to put a little thought into what I'm gonna say, and I'm going to show up on that time. I can flip a couple pages ahead, go, oh no, I have way too many service things already on that week, and this would count as service. I have well and above exceeded the 4 hours of service I'm supposed to do a week. I have to say no. Or I can look at it and go, huh, the only thing I had on this week was really some very minor things. Yeah, I can take that on. I can go ahead and say yes to that, and I write it in at that point. So if someone else asks me for something this week, I say, oh no, I've already committed to too much to my service allotment for the week. Okay. The other thing I do is I am also a color coder like Sarah. I color code a lot of things in my life on my calendar, on my sheets here too. And every day I take a different color pen. And so as I'm crossing things off of my live and die to-do list of all the things that need to get done, every day has a different color. Because what I found is there are some days where you do a lot of teaching, and some days where you do a lot of research, and some days we do a lot of service. And it can be really hard to see in the grand scope of how balanced your week was. When you get to Wednesday, you're like, I haven't done anything in this category. Well, no, because you've really focused on this other category well. And if you get to the end of the day and gone, I feel like all I've done is teach. Well, yeah, I have a heavy day of teaching or grading, and I checked off all these things on the teaching list. So yeah, I need to refocus and make sure I'm hitting these other categories as well. Because inevitably there's going to be a week that just one category has a lot going on, and adjustments have to be made. So, yeah, so I hope that kind of helps give an idea, the numeric breakdown of what our job entails for teaching, and why I was drowning for so long and so badly made a lot of sense. And I am much more acutely aware now of when I plan and design my courses, what is actually a realistic plan for that course. And I hope that helps you as you are heading into summer, where you might do some planning for fall before fall starts, to kind of think about more globally how your classes fit in with each other and fit within the actual description of what our job is supposed to be. Because we know it doesn't always fit that reality. So, but I'm happy to take questions and.
Anybody in the room with questions? We'll also take them from Zoom, but anybody in the room with questions? Will you repeat the question?
So the question is, do I track my time as a reflection on this? No, because that would be a data rabbit hole that I wouldn't come out of. The trick of being a numbers person is you have to know when to stop looking at the numbers and live. And that is a different balance for everybody. But the actual, I spent exactly this amount of time on each thing. I will say I do pretty well with kind of end of semester going back through and looking at to see patterns of these periods had more service and these periods had more research, to know how my semester kind of tracked on the whole in terms of the length of the to-do lists, especially if there were times when I felt particularly overwhelmed and particularly stressed, to say, okay, what was in that was just out of the norm versus what is something I need to be planning for next year in that kind of semester ups and downs cycle.
We're clear on Zoom.
Cindy, thank you. Yeah. It's amazing how well these 3 talks went together. It's that the theme that runs through it is that level of intentionality. And my epiphany as Cindy was talking was how often when I was teaching a 4-4 load, or my earliest days here at EKU, a 5-5 load, and I would finish planning one course then start planning the other course, and then spend the semester kicking myself because these two courses are asking students to do the same kinds of things at the same time, and then I have a break, but I'm drowning for too long a period. So when you got to the table, it was like, this is what I needed 18 years ago, honestly. I mean, that's great. So you don't need the template from Cindy to make that table. You just need a document that you can create that lets you organize things holistically to be able to look at that. And so I think that answers some questions people have. And what I like about it is it incorporates all the facets of faculty life. It's not just about the classes, but you've got that column for the teaching, the column for scholarship, column for service. And then there's always that other stuff that you have space. I like that you made the point, it's a dynamic document. I think that's great. So I avoided any conversation about the math because we have all donated so much time to this university and to our students, and we see it as a service to humanity to do that. But we also have to know that it has to be sustainable, and that's why you started with that. And I think that's brilliant. So really appreciate it. And everybody stay tuned because sometime next year is a TLI session on grading and feedback and that kind of thing.
It'll
So
have to be
yeah.
spring because I'm on sabbatical in fall.
it'll have to be spring. So that information will be covered, but we do appreciate it. So this is our last session. So we will stop the recording here in just a moment, but I